Dust kicks up in the dry air of Galilee. You can hear the low murmur of thousands of voices, the dragging of leather sandals on stone. We assume volume equals importance. If you have a message that will flip the world upside down, you stand tall. You square your shoulders. We are a species addicted to volume. You live in a world where authority is measured entirely in decibels. The algorithms on your devices reward the loudest outrage. The leaders who demand your attention are the ones who project the most aggressive. Visible dominance. You are trained, every single day, by every screen you touch, to believe that if something is truly important, it will be screamed. And so, when your life falls apart, you expect a shouting God. You want the booming voice from the clouds. When you are holding a manila folder with biopsy results you do not understand, or staring at a past due notice printed in bright red ink, or lying awake at 2 a.m. with the crushing weight of anxiety pressing on your chest. You look up and you demand the earthquake. You want the God of Sinai to step in, shatter the silence, and give you a megaphone answer. You want him to stand up and forcefully crush whatever is hurting you. But the silence stretches on. The room stays quiet. The clock ticks on the wall, and you assume the worst. You assume the silence means absence. You assume because he is not raising his voice, he has left the room entirely. This is not abandonment. It is the posture of absolute sovereignty, and you make sure even the people in the back row can hear your demands. But if you look closer at the text, at the very God is not pacing the floor of heaven, wringing his hands over the chaos of your circumstances. He is seated. And as we saw on the hillside in Galilee, the seated posture is the ultimate proof of control. The one who holds absolute power does not need to raise his voice to prove he is in charge. He does not need to match the frantic, chaotic energy of the empire. Think about how you pray in those moments of panic. You beg him to fight the way the world fights, with rapid force, with loud declarations, with immediate, visible dominance. You want a savior who operates like a military general, barking orders to neutralize the threat. He is offering something entirely different. He is inviting you into the quiet, unshakable confidence of a kingdom that cannot be threatened by your current crisis. The seated Christ is not ignoring the storm. He is ruling over it. But there is a catch. Because he is seated, because he is speaking in the intimate, quiet cadence of a rabbi rather than the booming shout of a politician, the physics of the interaction change completely. If a man is shouting through a megaphone, you can stay on the edges of the crowd. The first sentence of Matthew, chapter 5. You see a physical detail that completely dismantles the image of the shouting street preacher, and still hear his demands. But to hear a seated teacher, you are forced to make a physical movement. There is a proximity requirement to this kind of authority, and Matthew gives it to us right there in verse 1. The wind shifts off the lake. The tall grass rustles on the hillside. The sheer mass of the crowd presses forward. The sun beats down on their shoulders, and the dry air carries the dust kicked up by thousands of moving feet. He sits. He speaks, but he does not shout. The volume is entirely wrong for a revolution. If a man stands on a ridge and bellows, the sound travels down into the valley. He can reach the thousands. He can force his message into the ears of people who are barely paying attention. If a man shouts, you can stay in the back. You can keep your distance. You can listen without getting involved. You can be a spectator, but you cannot be a spectator to a seated king. The people on the fringes hear nothing. They see a rabbi sitting on a limestone rock. They see his lips moving, but the wind steals the words. If you want the words, you have to move. You have to step out of the comfort of the outer circle. You have to push past the murmuring crowd. You have to get your sandals dusty. It is a detail so small, so seemingly insignificant, that most readers run right past it just to get to the famous Beatitudes. Look at the end of verse 1. Matthew writes, "And when he sat down, his disciples came to him." The Greek verb is prosarkomai, to come near, to approach, to physically close the gap. This is not a casual stroll. In the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, Prosarkomai is the exact word used for priests approaching the altar in the temple. It is a holy approach. They are not just walking up a hill. They are stepping into the presence of the divine. But there is no heavy curtain. There is no bronze altar. There is just a man sitting on a rock in the dirt. The quietness of the rabbi is not a malfunction of his teaching style. It is a filter. It filters out the consumers. It filters out the thrill seekers. It filters out the people who only want a military revolution, leaving only the people who are desperate enough to lean in. When he refuses to shout, he forces a decision. You either walk away or you climb the rock. The casual listener stays in the valley. The committed disciple enters the throne room. You cannot hear the constitution of the kingdom from a safe distance. You must draw near. And when they finally close the gap, when they finally sit in the dust at his feet, they hear the paradox that will outlast the Roman Empire. He does not stand up to project his voice. He sits down. Matthew writes it plainly, seeing the crowds. He went up on the mountain. A crowd waited for a revolutionary shout, and they received a whispered beatitude. A rabbi climbed a jagged hillside, and the law of Moses was entirely rewritten. The religious elite stood to echo the past, and an outsider sat down to dictate the future. A king took the posture of a resting shepherd, and the logic of the Roman Empire was instantly dismantled. A throne was established on the crushed grass, and the socially invisible were handed a kingdom. The volume of heaven dropped to a whisper, and the frantic noise of the world was finally exposed. The distance between the divine and the desperate closed, and a group of outcasts were invited into the throne room. Same mountain, same God. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the seat itself. Not a throne of gold in a heavily guarded palace. Not the carved basalt bench of the Capernaum synagogue. A patch of dirt and limestone rock in the absolute middle of nowhere. He didn't wait for the religious system to give him a chair. He didn't need Rome to grant him a platform. And when he sat down, his disciples came to him. The Sermon on the Mount is not a stadium broadcast. It is an intimate transmission. The rock was not a place of defeat. It was the seat of supreme authority. If you are in a season where God feels painfully quiet, if the silence is convincing you that you have been abandoned to the chaos of your life, you might be looking for a standing, shouting Savior. You might be waiting for the earthquake when he is offering the whisper. The silence is not a sign of his absence. It is an invitation to close the gap. You cannot hear a seated king from the fringes of the crowd. The vine does not shout at the branches. And may the God who rules not by the heavy boots of empire, but by the quiet, unshakable power of his own presence, give you the courage to step out of the crowd and sit in the dust, at his feet. If this reached something in you today, subscribe. Leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is waiting for God to shout. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. This is the most famous block of teaching in human history, and it is delivered from a seated position. To modern ears, sitting implies casualness. It implies a relaxed posture, an informal gathering, a break from the work. We sit to rest. We stand to deliver important news. But in the ancient world, the physics of authority were entirely reversed. And to find out why the physical posture of Jesus changes, how you read every single command in this sermon, you have to understand the unwritten rule of the first-century synagogue, the sound of sheer desperation pressing in on a single hillside. This is a crowd that is hungry, sick, and exhausted from the Roman eagle. Step into a first-century synagogue. The room is crowded. The air smells of olive oil and dust. A heavy parchment scroll is brought forward. A man stands up. He unrolls the text. He reads the words of Moses. The congregation stands with him. They stand out of reverence. They stand for the text. They stand because the words belong to God. Then the reading ends. The scroll is rolled back. The man hands it to an attendant. And then he sits down. He sits down to teach. He sits down to unpack the meaning. He sits down to tell the people how to actually live the text. In the ancient Jewish world, a rabbi did not stand to deliver instruction. Standing was for reading another man's words. Sitting was for speaking with your own authority. The physical posture is a claim. The seat is not a place of rest. It is a throne of interpretation. You stand to recite. You sit to rule. You stand to echo history. You sit to shape the future. You stand to deliver a message. You sit to make a decree. Kings sat on thrones to judge. Elders sat at city gates to govern. Rabbis sat on stone benches to teach. They called it the seat of Moses. It was a literal stone chair. You can still find them today in the ruins of ancient Galilean towns. They were carved directly into the basalt walls of the assembly, casting a daily shadow over their fields. They have brought their crippled children. They have dragged their paralyzed friends. They are waiting for a revolutionary. When a rabbi took that specific seat, the room fell silent. The debate was over. His words were binding. His interpretation became the lens through which the community would live. The crowds following Jesus know this rule. They have seen it every Sabbath of their lives. They know the rhythm of the room. Stand for the law. Sit for the authority. But the religious leaders in Jerusalem have already rejected him. The synagogues are closing their doors to him. He has no official chair. He has no carved stone bench in Capernaum. He is an outsider. He is a rabbi without a pulpit. So he leaves the towns. He leaves the architecture of the religious elite. He walks away from the basalt walls and the oil lamps. He heads into the wild. He is about to deliver a teaching that will rewrite the very fabric of human relationships. He is about to touch the deepest parts of the law of Moses, but he does not do it in a building. He does it under an open sky. He walks up a mountainside. The crowd follows. The dust rises. The anticipation builds. They are waiting to see what he will do. Will he shout like a rebel? Will he stand like a prophet? He finds a rock. He stops. They are waiting for a voice that will echo across the valley and call down fire from heaven. A man walks up the incline. The Galilean sun beats down on the water behind them. The breeze off the lake carries the faint smell of salt and drying fishing nets. But as they move inland, the air grows still and heavy. Jesus looks at the faces pressing in around him. He sees the exhaustion. He sees the desperate, grasping hands of people who have been pushed to the absolute margins of their own society. And Matthew writes, "Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain. He begins to climb. The terrain is steep, forcing a slower, heavier pace. The people follow, their sandals slipping on the loose dirt and limestone fragments. He is leading them away from the crowded villages, away from the Roman garrisons, away from the stone synagogues where the elite hold court. He is pulling them into the wilderness. The mountain is not a geographical convenience. It is a theological statement. To the modern reader, a hill is just a hill. It is just a place with good natural acoustics. But every Jewish mind on that slope knows exactly what it means when a leader brings a nation to a mountain. The cultural memory is etched deep into their bones. Centuries earlier, a man named Moses climbed a jagged peak in a desolate wasteland. He distances himself slightly from the crush of the bodies. Moving higher up the slope, he finds a level spot among the limestone rocks. The sky turned black. The ground shook so violently that the people trembled in the valley. Lightning fractured the horizon, and a trumpet blast shattered the air. When God spoke at Sinai, the borders were heavily drawn. The people were told to stand back, to keep their distance, or they would die. The law was handed down in terror and smoke. Now, a new teacher ascends a different mountain, but there is no smoke. There is no trembling earth. There are no barricades keeping the untouchables away. There are only wildflowers, the soft wind, and the crush of broken people walking right up to the edge of the divine presence. The ascent is not a random hike. It is a deliberate reenactment. Jesus is positioning himself as the new Moses, preparing to deliver the new covenant. But he is not delivering it to a newly freed nation of ancient slaves. He is delivering it to a newly gathered kingdom of outcasts. He reaches a wide plateau. The crowd breathes heavily, fanning out across the crushed grass, waiting for the thunder. They expect him to stand tall like a military revolutionary and declare war on their Roman oppressors. Instead, he lowers himself to the rock. and the specific word Matthew uses to describe what happens next, and the crushed spring grass. The crowd hushes. The expectation is heavy enough to feel in your chest. They are waiting for the shout. The exact Greek verb chosen to record this physical movement completely changes the power dynamic of the entire sermon. Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. The wind off the Sea of Galilee brushes past them. The silence of the crowd thickens. And in that heavy, pregnant pause, Jesus lowers his weight onto the coarse limestone. The English translation gives us a simple, almost dismissive phrase, when he sat down, but the word Matthew writes in the original text is the Greek verb kathizo. It is a word that carries immense, staggering weight. It comes from the root kata, meaning down, and hezomai, to sit. But in the literary context of the ancient world, it is not. The word you use for a shepherd, resting his legs after a long walk. It is the word you use to describe a judge taking the bench. It is the word you use for a monarch ascending a throne. It means to appoint, to establish, to confer a kingdom. It is the exact same word John uses in chapter 19 of his gospel. When the Roman governor Pontius Pilate is preparing to sentence Jesus to the cross, the text says Pilate brought him out and sat down ekathison on the judgment seat. Pilate takes the seat to condemn. Jesus takes the seat to heal. It is the same root Paul uses when he writes that God raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places. They are waiting for the rallying cry that will finally organize this fractured mob into an army. And then he does something strange. And it is the word Jesus himself uses in the book of Revelation. When he declares, "I conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne." That root changes everything. The seated posture is not a sign of exhaustion. It is a declaration of sovereignty. When Jesus sits on that Galilean hillside, he is not just resting his feet. He is claiming the seat of Moses. But he is not in a synagogue. He is not sitting under the authority of the religious elite. And he is not asking for their permission. He is claiming authority over the law itself. A revolutionary stands to shout. A politician stands to campaign. A king sits down to rule. If something about this story is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So he takes his seat on the rock, and the disciples come to him. This is another detail that alters the geometry of the moment. He doesn't project his voice out to the edges of the crowd. He draws the core group in. The verb Matthew uses is prosarkomai, to approach, to draw near. The rock on the hillside is not a resting place. It is a throne room. The mountain is not a stadium. It is a sanctuary. He is seated as the new lawgiver, establishing the constitution of a brand new reality. But most people assume the Sermon on the Mount is exactly that, a booming, projected sermon. We picture a towering figure standing at the peak. Kingdom, he is about to announce to them, looks absolutely nothing like the empire they are praying for. Look at the crowd. They know exactly how power operates. Power wears armor. Power carries an iron spear. Power marches through their villages in tight, disciplined columns of bronze and red leather. They have felt the heavy boots of the Roman legion on their streets. They have smelled the blood of failed zealots hanging from wooden beams. They have watched their grain get confiscated and their sons get conscripted. They know the brutal, crushing weight of an empire that rules by force. And so they want their own empire. They want a Messiah who will stand taller than Caesar. They want a general who will draw a sword, rally the tribes, and march on Jerusalem. They want a battle cry to echo off the limestone cliffs and strike fear into the Roman garrison. But Jesus sits down. The optic is jarring. The physical posture contradicts every expectation in the crowd. He opens his mouth. He does not shout. He does not list the grievances against Rome. He does not outline a military strategy. He looks at the beggars, sitting in the dirt. He looks at the grieving widows. He looks at the crippled, the hungry, the socially invisible, and he calls them the center of the universe, throwing his voice over the wind. delivering a manifesto to the masses like a politician at a modern stadium rally. We imagine a megaphone moment. "Blessed are the poor in spirit," he says, "for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Rome rules by crushing the weak. He rules by crowning them. Rome takes territory by the sword. He hands the earth to the meek. Rome demands your life. He offers his own. The emperor stands on a marble balcony in the capital city to declare war. The true king sits on a patch of crushed grass in the wilderness to declare peace. The people came looking for a warlord to destroy their enemies. They found a rabbi telling them to love their enemies. This is not a call to arms. It is an upside-down coronation. He is not building a militia. He is building a new humanity. They expected the fire of judgment. They received the water of mercy. They expected a roar. They received an invitation. The seated king does not panic. The seated king does not rush. Every word that leaves his mouth dismantles the logic of human power, and he does it all from a seated position, completely unbothered by the empire raging around him. He does not need to project dominance because his authority is absolute, quiet, and immovable. But the real tragedy is not that the first-century crowd misunderstood his posture. The real tragedy is that 2,000 years later, we still do.